Hello, welcome to week 4. We're going to talk about the final battle or siege that ends the American Revolution. And here's a very famous painting by John Trumbull. It was painted in 1820. We see the French on the left side. We see the British surrendering on the middle, center of the photo with George Washington off to the side. We see Lafayette in the middle, and then we see the Continental Army American troops off to the right. All right, so the surrender takes place in 1781. Let's look at what more details about the battle. We haven't really gone into a lot of details about specific battles, but Yorktown is definitely a battle that we want to see. Well, how does it finally end, right? How do the people get there? And I'm going to teach this in 2 sections. We're going to first talk about the surrender, the actual Battle of Yorktown, and then the next video that'll be coming up will be when we look at the different people that actually allowed the revolution, that were members of the revolution, that participated in it. And of course, we're always trying to answer the question of how. How did these American colonists spread across 13 colonies, many from different lands, different languages, different reasons for moving to the colonies and settling in the colonies, different businesses? How did they become an independent nation against Britain, who is definitely considered to be one of the most powerful, or the most powerful navy and military in Europe at the time? Right. So we always want to look back where we were. So we started really in Massachusetts in 1775, but the war officially begins as far as the Continental Congress is declared in 1776 with the ratification of Declaration of Independence. Then we move on to some major battles that were turning points. So some of the key moments and turning points that we look at are going to be when George Washington crosses the Delaware, surprising the Hessians at the Battle of Trenton in a victory, big morale booster. And then, of course, we have General Howe, who won at the Battle of Saratoga in New York State, New York Colony at the time, right? Major, major turning point. In fact, that's the turning point that pushes the French king, Louis XVI, to agree to support as an ally the Continental Army, which brings much needed money, funds, gunpowder, weapons, soldiers. Now, the Netherlands were also supporting the American colonies, the Continental Army, Continental Congress, but we probably give more credit to the French because they actually sent people. They sent the soldiers, and they sent the most as far as the money sent. But remember, we're going to talk about some of the people involved, and there were ambassadors. Okay, had to have a chat with the dogs. So it's the French that appear as the greatest allies, but there was help coming behind the scenes, and we'll talk in our next video about some of the ambassadors. And then Washington's time with the army spent at Valley Forge. And so it's not just Valley Forge, there were other winter camps. And Washington is still the commander in chief, although at this point, Continental Congress is thinking of removing him. And it's Alexander Hamilton who writes a 30-page letter to the Continental Congress outlining Washington's plans for the coming year, for 1778, and how he planned his strategy for the rest of the war. And this, along with some other people helping Washington, keeps him in as commander-in-chief. But what we see at Valley Forge is the training that the troops are going to undertake with General von Steuben, with Washington requiring that everyone get a smallpox vaccination, which limits the exposure to smallpox and keeps the troops able to fight. Those 2 things are really what strengthens the Continental Army and makes them a true fighting force. And then, of course, it was during that time at Valley Forge that Washington gets the letter that the French have agreed to come join the Continental Army as an alliance. And then we talk about what happened out west with the British surrender in Vincennes, Indiana, which was a huge victory for that Western territory, right? The French arrive in 1779. Rochambeau coming with ships and soldiers and silver, right? And then we focused on the Southern campaign, what was happening in the South. And so one thing to always remember with American Revolution, we're just touching on turning points, but there were battles continually going on throughout the colonies in different areas. And we're going to talk mostly about the Southern campaign because that's also where it ends. The war starts in New England and Massachusetts, but it's going to end in the South. And so after several battles in the South, General Cornwallis, who is the leader of the British Army, decides that he's going to take his troops north. He's been pushed out of Charleston at this point. They have won at Cowpens. There has been a win at Kings Mountain. There's several wins, and they're starting to move north. And so he heads to Yorktown. And many people say, well, why Yorktown? Why Yorktown, Virginia? Because there was a river there. Because anytime you have a river, you're near a seaside port, you can get supplies in by ship. And at this point, the British are controlling Philadelphia, which is a port city, and they're also controlling New York City. And so this is going to allow Cornwallis to rest his troops, to get supplies in, and sort of recharge, regroup, and come up with a strategy plan. So here's some stamps on commemorating the battle at Yorktown, and I like it because it shows us the York River, and it's very interesting because right below, if you look below the York River on the bottom, you see the James River. That is where the very first successful British colony was, Jamestown, Virginia. So it's very interesting that what really becomes the United States, the last battle that determines that the colonies will become independent and a nation, it ends just a few miles from where the first colony began, the first successful colony began. All right, so the big question is why? Why would Cornwallis move to Yorktown? And I touched on that a little bit. But if we look here, this is where the Yorktown fort was, where that British flag symbol is that you see pretty much right in the middle of this map. And this is an actual map. This is from the National Archives. And then you see the York River, and you see there's some ships right off the shore. Those are going to be British ships. All right. And right across where the red arrow is, that's going to be Gloucester. And Gloucester is where Cornwallis was hoping to. He's trying to gather his troops. He knew that the Continental Army was on its way. He was going to head and move his troops out once he realized that they were coming. And again, he's thinking to head north to Philadelphia, head north to New York City. He's going to be able to get those supplies coming in. So that's his goal, is to get further north because he's trying to move out of the South. And he wants to get where he knows he can get a good amount of supplies and rest for his soldiers. Mother Nature has a second idea. And this reminds me of the battle when the French first came to Providence, Rhode Island, and a hurricane damaged the ships and damaged both the British ships and the French ships. So a huge storm comes in. And if you look very carefully at this map, so if you're in the classroom, I put on the Google Forms this image, and you can look a little bit closer, and it actually says sunken vessels right underneath where the lightning bolts are. And so several of the British ships were actually sunk in this storm. Cornwallis had started to move about 15% of his soldiers across. But the other 85% are stuck. They can't get across because of the storm. They can't get across because their ships are sunk. Right? But it's not over yet, because here comes George. George Washington is marching to Yorktown with General Rochambeau and 14,000 soldiers, about half of them French, half of them Continental Army. This is a map of the route. It's actually a historic route, and you can travel to many of these different places. Again, if you're in the classroom, I've posted this on a Google form, and you can look a little bit closer at this map and the key points. But we notice that the red line coming up from the south is the British Cornwallis. Excuse me. And then we see that the blue is going to be the Continental Army marching, and they march about 10 to 50 miles a day. heading on with Rochambeau and Washington heading down to Yorktown. So uh, Rochambeau and Washington meet in Mount Vernon. They develop a plan of action, and they decide that they're going to go ahead and attack at Yorktown. At the same time, you can see that there's blue dotted lines, and those are going to be the French ships coming to the Yorktown harbor. All right, we also see that there are some British ships heading to Yorktown also. So everything's convening at Yorktown, Virginia. All right, so if we look a little bit closer here at this map, and again, this is an actual map from that time. Okay, we see the York River, right? And you notice the gold fleur-de-lis. That's going to represent the French ships coming in. All right, so that's in the water. It's a little bit hard to tell where water begins and ends here, right? And then where the British flag is, just over my head, that's going to be Yorktown. That's going to be where the fort is, okay? And there's a few British ships there. But notice what's happening. If we look over here, oops, right over there, in the far corner, look at that French fleet. Look how many ships are there. Look at the French frigates that are coming in. And they are blocking this river. They're blocking the way in and they're blocking the way out. So no British ships can come in and no British ships can leave. They've now got Cornwallis surrounded. All right, so again, if we look a little bit closer here, here's the fort where the British flag symbol is, and then where the Patriot symbol is over on the far right and the fleur-de-lis, we see shovels. And if you look closely, you'll see it says second parallel line. And where the other shovel is, it's missing off of here, but the map's in the classroom on the first parallel. These are trenches that the Continental Army dug. And these trenches are dug along the line, and it's going to allow them to also dig other trenches. You can see all of these thin lines going up. And they're going to be able to advance in trenches going up to the fort. So this is going to keep their head low. It's going to be hard for them to be seen. They can move at night very easily without the British troops seeing them. All right, so this is where the battle is going to end. We have Redoubt 9, which is going to be attacked on October 14th. And so this is a reconstruction of where they would have been. This would have been built up much more. You could have had cannons on top of it. You would have had soldiers at the top. See how you have these wooden spikes coming out? That's going to keep somebody from being able to easily climb up the hill because these spikes are sticking out. And so you're going to have to come from far away. You can't directly attack. And then this is Redoubt 10. And so we have two troops that are going to be attacking. We have the Patriot troops, the Continental Army, 400 soldiers, led by General Lafayette. And Alexander Hamilton is also with that. Redoubt 9 is going to be French troops, about 400 of them. So we have a total of 800 soldiers. The night of October 14th, they're fixing their bayonets and they're going into attack. Remember, they're going through the trenches. It's at night. They can't be seen. All right. So if we look at the end of the battle, and the final surrender is going to come 4 days later on October 18th. Okay, it actually starts September 28th. So it took almost 3 weeks of fighting. 3 weeks. And there was some distance fighting with cannons. There wasn't a lot of, in the beginning, face-to-face fighting. It was more prepping, again, with the digging of those trenches, which is quite clever. And a lot of people think of trench warfare just with World War I, but we see trench warfare. Definitely part of the American Revolution, right? A total of almost 9,000 casualties, majority of them British. Again, the British were blocked in. They were cornered in. They had nowhere to go. Their back was up against the York River. They had no way out. It's called a siege because part of the battle was waiting them out. The British could not get supplies in. They couldn't get food in. There was fresh water available because of the river, but they couldn't get any other supplies in. They couldn't get more ammunition in. They couldn't get more gunpowder in. Medical care even would have been limited. And so a siege is when you sit and wait. And that's a lot of what the Continental Army does. They're prepared to sit and wait. They have the ability to get supplies in. The French ships are blocking the harbor. Cornwallis is basically blocked into a corner. He's got his back up against the river. Right? And so that ends the war. That is the official battle. That's the battle that's going to come in and end everything. We're going to talk in the next lesson about what's the official ending of World War. So the surrender stops the fighting. It's an armistice. It's a peace. But it doesn't officially end the war. We have to wait for a treaty to be signed between the two governments. And that's not going to happen until 1783. So this ends the battles in 1781. But as far as historians are concerned, the American Revolution ends in 1783 with the signing of the treaty. And that's what we'll discuss in lesson 5. So that's it. Yorktown, final battle. I always remember it because Y is at the very end of the alphabet. So when I'm struggling sometimes to remember which was the last battle, I always think Y is at the end of the alphabet. Yorktown was the last battle of the American Revolution.